Our history is not in a school curriculum. That's why I decided, no, let me start a Swakopmund museum, which is talking the truth of what really happened here in Swakopmund. The German soldiers, they were the one who taking the picture. They were proud of the massacre. This picture, it was taken between 1904 and 1908 in Swakopmund. You can see the sand dunes in the background. And the prisoners of war are in chain, having chains around their neck, and they are burying their colleagues. You can even see the shovels there. And this one is our heroes, they are in chains. There's a lot of photographs, that is evidence that shows that they committed a genocide. And those photographs was not taken by our ancestors, it's the German soldiers themselves. People for the concentration camps that were buried there are always taking care of these graves 4 times per year. And then we are taking the shovels and rakes and restore the grave, because sometimes also the wind is blowing those graves. Then the skeleton are coming out, so we are always restoring the graves. The concentration camp was behind the lighthouse. It was the first concentration camp in human history.
From the book, The Kaiser's Holocaust, Germany's Forgotten Genocide and the Colonial Roots of Nazism. There were 5 main camps. Each had been located in or near a site of German settlement, as it was there that the need for African labor was most pressing. Most of the records, both military and civilian, for the concentration camps of German Southwest Africa have been lost. A surprising amount of official documentation from the camp at Swakopmund has survived. The Herero were placed behind a double row of barbed wire. From early morning until late at night, they had to work under the clubs of the raw overseers. In 1905, the inmates of the concentration camps were used to unload transport ferries and carry the goods up to depots inland. In Swakopmund, Herero women were formed into teams of 8 and, in lieu of oxen, made to pull the wagons. Due to the lack of male prisoners, it was mainly women and children as young as 12 who were rented out to private individuals. The colonial government introduced formal regulations for the renting out of the prisoners. The army's ration list placed concentration camp prisoners just above mules in order of priorities. The official camp ration was 500 grams of rice or flour per day for a male. Women and children were often given half rations. As neither rice nor flour was known to the Herero, they had no knowledge of how to cook it. The prisoners ate these unfamiliar rations raw, unaware that uncooked, they caused diarrhea. It is hard to determine the number of lives lost in the camps. The only camp that kept records of mortality in 1905 was the Swakopmund camp. According to their statistics, approximately 40% of the prisoners in Swakopmund died during their first 4 months of captivity.
Hallo, guten Morgen oder guten Tag. Hallo. Lassen Sie das jetzt hier? Nee, das finde ich ein bisschen unangenehm. Wir zeichnen heute diese Ereignisse jetzt auch offiziell als das, was sie gewesen sind, ein Völkermord. Wir bekennen uns damit auch zu unserer historischen Verantwortung. Und im Lichte dieser historischen und auch moralischen Verantwortung Deutschlands werden wir Namibia und die Nachkommen der Opfer um Vergebung bitten. Und als Geste der Anerkennung des unermesslichen Leids, das den Opfern zugefügt wurde, wollen wir Namibia und die Nachkommen der Opfer mit einem substanziellen Programm in Höhe von 1,1 Milliarden Euro unterstützen. Und dabei wird es ganz besonders um Wiederaufbau und Entwicklung gehen. Ja, ich bin außerordentlich froh und auch sehr dankbar, dass es jetzt endlich gelungen ist, mit Namibia eine Einigung über einen gemeinsamen Umgang mit einem der dunkelsten Kapitel unserer gemeinsamen Geschichte zu erzielen.
They are refusing to pay us. What they are giving us is not reparation payment as defined in terms of the rules of international law. They are just giving a pittance that they call they also call it development fund for projects like schools and roads, bridges and blah, 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 blah. They cannot qualify the definition of reparation. Reparation is punishment payment for the crime that you have committed. It's not a gift.
They're talking about infrastructure development. Infrastructure development is the responsibility of the Namibian state. We reject it because, one, the German government does not acknowledge genocide. It says genocide from today's perspective. That is not acknowledgement. Germany must fully acknowledge genocide. Germany must give a sincere apology, and Germany must pay reparations. It must compensate. They must restitute.
In that package and the agreement, there's no way the reparation is not mentioned. The descendants of the victims, felt a little bit insulted. And then, of course, the amount. There is already a precedent that the money that were paid to the Jews, the victims of the Holocaust, when you compare to that amount that the German offered, is completely way different in terms of the substance of that package. The second aspect is that the process of negotiation between the two governments did not include the victims group, the descendant of the victims group. As a result, that what we have seen, that when the agreement was reached, it generated more divisions and more anger and more questions and all those kind of things.
They have been very tricky in terms of the language used. They never even once use the word reparation in the Joint Declaration, and that is quite deliberate. I think it will open a Pandora's box. And you would also realize that a good number of countries in the West have not been supportive of what has been happening here. They also have got bones in their own closet. So the moment they, for example, support the Herero and Namaqua case against the Germans, the next thing it will be them, who would then also have to pay.
Kayam si radius ora ale nganan ngau mama. Radius ora ki nganan ngau. Babi ki ngai ama bisna. Tension da jera. Kabe nedra mi se dai.
The late 19th century saw a campaign to colonize the region, which would later come to be known as German Southwest Africa. By then, most of the continent had long been divided between European colonizers, and Germany's share could not be described as prime land. However, by various means, the new masters began to claim pasture land and livestock from the indigenous Herero and Namaqua tribes.
They would claim you owe money and then you lose your land and that killing people, raping our people, all of these things.
Omukandu omuhero wanga asombo abeaha okushebina byo ahero byo atalera nganda
the herd of cattle that they've confiscated or stolen from the Hereros. These herds were growing. They started fencing off larger hectares of land, to make their own private farms.
In 1904, the Herero people launch an uprising. They are later joined by the Nama tribe. Rioting continues to consume the entire region. From the book, The Kaiser's Holocaust, Germany's Forgotten Genocide and the Colonial Roots of Nazism. By 1904, the Herero people had endured several years of abuse and provocation, and events in Okahanja were the spark that set all of Hereroland ablaze. Brandishing clubs, knives and guns, the Herero attacked German farms. Settlers were killed in their beds, on occasion by their own Herero servants. Colonial troops surrounded the rebels and mowed them down. From Major Stulman's diary, who fought in Waterberg, we had been explicitly told beforehand that what we were dealing with was the extermination of the whole tribe. Nothing living was to be spared.
This is of Itoto.
Where the genocide was started in 1904 on 12 January, when the war started in Okahanja, through this gentleman's place, Okamboro, where he'd been born, staying. From there, started through up in Okanjira.
Herero survivors were pushed into the desert, where hunger and thirst finished off anyone that the soldiers couldn't reach. At that point, the Germans didn't realize that they were treating their potential labor source unwisely. It was then that the concentration camps appeared. On January the 14th, 1905, the general was directly ordered to establish a number of what the orders termed Konzentrationlager, a literal translation of the English concentration camp. Chancellor von Bülow specifically stated that the surrendering Herero should be put under guard and required to work.
There's no way you could have been outside, not in those camps. If you were not in those camps, the only other option was that you were in Botswana. You see, Germany, they also committed another crime, the Holocaust. The Shoah, as the Jews would call it, And all of these things, it's a continuation of what was began here.
Anticipating the concentration camps of the Third Reich, some of the dead of Shark Island became a resource exploited in the name of medical and racial science. The skulls were then placed into crates by the German soldiers and shipped to museums, collections and universities in Germany. This practice was so widespread and accepted in Southwest Africa that in 1905 it was depicted on a postcard.
This was the biggest concentration camp, the one of Windhoek. When they were building this museum here, when they were digging the foundation to build, they saw human remains, bones. These things are constructed on mass graves within the concentration camp. This place, this building here, is now used as a museum. That is where they are keeping the human remains, the skulls that we have been bringing from Germany.
According to a UN report from 1985, the German troops wiped out 3/4 of the Herero people and about 1/3 of the Nama.
When they came out of the concentration camps, they were awakened to a new reality of their lands, their homes, now being private land, suddenly acres of land that is now occupied by white people. Reflecting from today's perspective, these people did this because of land. They realized there is a lot of land, there are cattle, finding the new living space for the German Aryan nation. where we live today is not where our people historically were. It's a piece of land that is reserved for black people. And this is where we live. The genocide to us is not a history, but is present-day reality. The land we lost has never been returned.
People, once they came out of the concentration camps, were put into native reserves to make space, to make Lebensraum for German settlers whose descendants are still living on that same land. And the people who were dispossessed continue to live in the native reserves in which the Germans put them and which were, further strengthened and institutionalized by the apartheid.
Cái tài gì anh ai đi tôi ia genocide cha chỉ sáng tài tôi haru quay đại chỉ cái gì mang quan niệm hậu bao cái gì anh hana tao swap ấy chỉ là gì khali ne tham na anh đã gì im hùng ấy đã khôi ao tarop tin chỉ tarop ti tài sen gì ti khona cha đi ra mi baski naba là chỉ tarong hộp na tapirin hộp nào chỉ ngang hộp na ta chỉ tu दोनों तान अपना जे कैसे कैसा खमर न जाए खम ना हाँ होनी का हाँ
Ian ji asida di kai kuna an na ip ngapan di kai kuna lahu o da ke ngap ji a kau tom khawa an was khau ko sesta khar kuri kunga lat sesta ida ki akan sesta kuri da ki a ne khabe ki a upo an naman kari kaura naman aruman kaman ni ti ki ami ne khaba to is ngara ki nenden kuri khada ki tira ki nga ko ka ki a no wada ki kadin o se ui hai tira ki karin wa I tira ki nga ko khada ki a ne khap ka ki a to ki Europke a tai khabe iki kore au in adida mire kai na chu a rasida di hukumi amber idma hukki ne batski umdren di komai sin khachi ani ba karin wa komai na chinra khachi karis ka uchinira wa komaron khatuning kari ngaske coach ka si khuna o stamu khaski Kain huba huda ki ya ui chini ui ba ha abununi.
It is important that we enter into conversation about the land issue to make sure that we come up with workable solutions for everybody that is involved. You remember that the Germans that are living here, they have been living here for centuries and centuries. There's no way you can say that you should not be given land, they should give land back away. I think the German government thinks that the chapter is closed. They have agreed on the development package that they are going to give. They have apologized and that they acknowledge that genocide took, and they think that the chapter is closed. So you can see that it is pushing divisions deeper and deeper and creating new problems. What the agreement did, it further put them away apart from each other.
Kann es regnen, stürmen oder schneien, denn du strahlst ja selber wie ein Sonnenschein. Wir gratulieren.
I can tell the history very well of the country because my family was involved all this time. My grandfather from my mother's side He came here as a 19-year-old young soldier. He came in 1904. After the war, he decided to remain in that time German Southwest Africa. My children are the fourth generation, and I've got grandchildren who are now the fifth children. You know, the interesting thing is, after the First World War, of course, the German rule was over. The South Africans then took over. They continued with exactly the same policies. They did not, their local population, especially the Nama and the Herero, there was even stricter rules keeping them in their reserves. They were not allowed own land or own animals, nothing. And that remained right through to independence in 1990. We, as young whites, during apartheid time, we were kept, you know, we had our own schools, everything was apart, separate. We were never really introduced to that topic until when we started, like my first wife and myself, when we were still farming, we started a school on the farm for the children of the employees, the black children, mainly Nama, in our area where we were living. Then it became clearer to us what had actually happened. There had never been closure about the trauma that they experienced, especially while that status, sort of lower class citizen, never changed until independence. Only when in 2004, when the 100-year centenary of the Colonial War came up, people, of course, thought about the history. Many people, of course, I must say that also, they sort of shrugged that off. They felt, this is so long ago, it's good to remember, but then forget about it. There are many German-speaking Namibians who don't have a history going back to the colonial times. They came after the wars. Many came after the Second World War. When we started convincing people or trying to convince people to think about our historic background, they started blaming us that we sort of, you know, dig out old stories which may just create problems. They say, let sleeping dogs lie. We are very determined that we must solve this issue. We must get understanding.
Only in 2006 that the Namibian Parliament unanimously passed a resolution in which they decided that they now need to approach the German government for an acknowledgement, for an apology, and for reparations. From 2006 until about 2015, the German government resisted. They resisted, but it was due to the pressure that was put by the Nama and Herero people through their leaders, that Germany finally said, okay, let's talk about it.
I think this is a very bold decision by the German government to even start negotiations. You know, the joint declaration actually appeared to be really a breakthrough. The Herero and Namaqua people, in a large number, did not agree with the joint declaration. Their main argument is that they were not involved in the negotiations.
Nang obat tangsa lagi ramunin ai heron gap ni ngalit kasa. Sini heron en ngabe organisation ting commission ni ding obat pongwasa. Kasa namanga namani mintui sara kira wakanas kan hau namadasi ngogas ngada kirang hau mabara kirang hau mas stadium ini kirang da kira ini kena terci sara yang obat kana. Nadi tau belakang.
The negotiation we are talking about, but it has not yet started as far as the Hereros and the Namas. We say you committed genocide. Let's sit down and talk so that we can tell you how you have damaged us and how much we have to calculate in terms of our losses.
The German government did not accept a renegotiation of the joint declaration, but by now they had agreed to adding a few particulars. They call it the addendum. They also agreed that the original stipulation of how certain sections of the compensation should be spent could be changed. They would have a foundation running the whole compensation. They would communicate with all the involved chiefs. The chiefs would have to find out from their communities what they want. So if there's a community who don't have water supply, who don't have electricity, who don't have a school, a hospital, no road to their village, whatever, then the community can say, that is what we want first. Then the chief will communicate to the foundation and say, this is what our area wants. But in the addendum, they specify that the amount of 1.1 billion euros will still stand as initial amount.
Eto shomuho kombat butfat ete muno mime hindi muno wando ishi. Ndio ndimba kamburo mahiwa vanene vetu. Posiete katuna ngore nao. Tumuna kokushabi vinambia shitiro vanene vao. Posianga tuhangane tulilo mundu umwe. Posianga tufutathane gatubatirathane okudambo kienda ku Mulungu. Okuhepa.
Of course, we know reasons why Germany doesn't want to pay. Germany is supported by many of the European cousins who are equally guilty of similar crimes across the world. We know that we are pioneers. Once our case is successful or is through, it sets a precedence where other genocided communities across the world would also come forth and place their demands to recognize that our struggle is part of a global, of a bigger picture and a bigger struggle the world around.
It is a classic case study in which two small, tiny communities on the southern tip of Africa are taking on a mighty, sort of Western power. it is a case that people are following because it would set a precedent for how other African countries, would learn from this experience to also deal with their former colonial masters like France and like Belgium and so on.
I'm sure a lot of countries in the West or wherever, countries that were at one point imperial powers, they are watching this case with keen interest. Like, whatever happens would affect us. Because other countries are also gonna, put in a claim to say, no, what also you guys did here was wrong and you have to pay us.